The Codex Washingtonianus, a Codex Washingtonensis, designated by W or 032 Epsilon 014, also called the Washington Manuscript of the Gospels, and the Freer Gospel, contains the 4 biblical Gospels and was written in Greek on vellum in the 4th or 5th century. The manuscript is lacunose. Description: the Codex is a book of 187 leaves of 20.5 to 21 cm by 13 to 14.5 cm with painted wooden covers, consisting of 26 quires. The text is written in 1 column per page, 30 lines per page. There are numerous corrections made by the original scribe and a few corrections dating to the late 5th or 6th century. John chapter 1 verse 1-5 to 11 as a replacement of a presumably damaged folio, and dates to around the 7th century. It is missing Mark chapter 15 verses 13 to 38 and John chapter 14 verse 26-16 to 7. The ink is dark brown. The words are written continuously without separation. Accents are absent. The rough breathing is used very rarely. Like in Codex Washingtonensis, the Gospels follow in Western order: Matthew, John, Luke, Mark. The following nomina sacra are used in the Codex: Theta Sigma, Kappa Sigma, Chi Sigma, Iota Sigma, Pi Nu Alpha, Alpha Nu Omicron Sigma, Pi Eta Rho, Mu Eta Rho, Upsilon Sigma, Delta Alpha Delta, Iota 8 the Lambda. Matthew chapter 16 verse 2b3 is present and not marked as doubtful or spurious. Luke chapter 22 verses 43 to 44, John chapter 5 verse 4 and the pericope de adultera are omitted by the scribe. It lacks Matthew chapter 5 verses 21 to 22 and Luke chapter 19 verse 25. It contains Matthew chapter 23 verse 14, as the manuscripts 0104, 0107, 0133, 0138, and most other Byzantine MSS. Text of Codex. The Codex is cited as a consistently cited witness of the first order in the critical apparatus of the Novum Testamentum Grace. The Codex was apparently copied from several different manuscripts and is the work of 2 scribes. The text type is eclectic. Math 1 to 28, Luke 8 13 to 24, 53 Byzantine text type. Mark chapter 1 verse 1-5 to 30 Western text type similar to Old Latin versions. Mark 5:31 to 16:20 Caesarean text type near to p45. Luke chapter 1 verse 1-8-12 and J 5:12 to 21-25 Alexandrian text type. John chapter 1 verse 1-5-11 mixed with some Alexandrian and Western readings. This text was added in the 7th century, probably for replacement of damaged text. It has addition in Mark chapter 1 verse 3. The citation from is 40 to 3 is longer. Mark chapter 10 verse 48 is omitted as in Codex 1241. In Matthew chapter 1 verse 10 it reads Alpha Mu Omega Nu 4 Alpha Mu Omega Sigma. The reading of the Codex agrees with LF 13 and the Byzantine text. Matthew chapter 10 verse 12 it reads Lambda Epsilon Gamma Omicron Nu Tau Epsilon Sigma Epsilon Iota Rho Eta Nu Eta Tau Omega Omicron Iota Kappa Omega Tau Omicron Upsilon Tau Omega instead of Alpha Upsilon Tau Eta Nu. The reading is used by manuscripts. Sinaiticus *2, Bezat Regis, Corridithi, F 1:10-10, IVGCL. Matthew chapter 23 verse 3 has the reading in basic agreement with majority text against the United Bible Society's Pi Omicron Iota Eta Sigma Alpha Tau Epsilon Kappa Alpha, Tau Eta Rho Epsilon Tau Epsilon. In Mark chapter 2 verse 3 it has Iota iota delta omicron upsilon alpha nu delta rho epsilon sigma epsilon rho chi omicron nu tau alpha iota pi rho omicron sigma alpha upsilon tau omicron nu beta alpha sigma tau alpha zeta omicron nu tau epsilon sigma epsilon nu kappa rho epsilon beta alpha tau tau omega pi alpha rho alpha lambda upsilon tau iota kappa omicron nu, supported only by Old Latin Codex Palatinus instead of usual variant epsilon rho chi omicron nu tau alpha iota phi epsilon rho omicron nu tau epsilon sigma pi rho omicron sigma alpha upsilon tau omicron nu pi alpha rho alpha lambda upsilon tau iota kappa omicron nu alpha iota rho omicron mu epsilon nu omicron nu upsilon pi omicron tau epsilon sigma sigma alpha rho omega nu. In Mark chapter 10 verse 19, phrase mu eta alpha pi omicron sigma tau epsilon rho eta sigma omitted, as in Codices B.K. Sci. F1, F13, 28, 700, 1010, 1079, 1242, 1546, 2148, 10, 950, 1642, 1761, SYRS Arm, Geo. In mu Arc 13-2 it contains addition kappa alpha iota mu epsilon tau alpha tau rho iota omega nu eta mu epsilon rho omega nu alpha lambda omicron sigma alpha nu alpha sigma tau eta sigma epsilon tau alpha iota alpha nu epsilon upsilon chi epsilon iota rho omega news DW. In Mark chapter 9 verse 49 it reads pi alpha sigma gamma alpha rho pi epsilon rho iota alpha lambda iota sigma theta eta sigma epsilon tau alpha iota, as manuscripts BL delta F1 F13 28,565,700 260 SYRS Copsa. In Luke chapter 4 verse 17 it has textual variant kappa alpha nu omicron iota she alpha sigma tau beta iota beta lambda iota omicron nu, together with the manuscripts A, B, L, she, 33, 892, 1195, 1241, 547, SYRS H, PAL, Copsa, O against variant kappa alpha nu alpha pi tau upsilon she alpha sigma tau beta iota beta lambda iota omicron nu, supported by DCK delta theta pi psi F1 F13 28 565 700 1009 1010 and many other manuscripts. Luke chapter 22 verses 43-44 omitted, as in Codices P75 *A B T 1071. In Luke chapter 23 verse 34 omitted words, and Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." Quote. This omission is supported by the manuscripts Papyrus 75, Sinaiticus B. D** theta 0124 1241 A Codex Bezelat Syrizan Copsa Copbo. In John chapter 7 verse 1 it reads omicron upsilon gamma alpha rho epsilon iota chi epsilon nu epsilon she omicron upsilon sigma iota alpha nu for omicron upsilon gamma alpha rho eta theta epsilon lambda epsilon news. The reading is supported by Old Latin A B F F squared L R1 and by Syriac-Curetonian Phreologian. The ending of Mark in this codex is especially noteworthy because it includes a unique insertion after Mark chapter 16 verse 14, referred to as the Phreologian. Kappa alpha kappa epsilon iota nu omicron iota alpha pi epsilon lambda omicron gamma omicron upsilon nu tau omicron lambda epsilon gamma omicron nu tau epsilon sigma omicron tau iota omicron iota omega nu omicron upsilon tau omicron sigma tau eta sigma alpha nu omicron mu iota alpha sigma upsilon pi omicron tau omicron nu sigma alpha nu epsilon sigma tau iota nu omicron mu eta epsilon omega nu tau alpha upsilon pi omicron tau omega nu pi nu epsilon upsilon mu alpha tau omega nu alpha kappa alpha theta alpha rho tau alpha tau eta nu alpha lambda 8 the theta epsilon iota alpha nu tau omicron upsilon theta epsilon omicron upsilon kappa alpha tau alpha lambda alpha beta epsilon sigma theta alpha iota delta upsilon nu alpha mu iota nu delta iota alpha tau omicron upsilon tau omicron alpha pi omicron kappa alpha lambda upsilon psi omicron nu sigma omicron upsilon tau eta nu delta iota kappa alpha iota omicron sigma upsilon nu eta delta eta epsilon kappa epsilon iota nu omicron iota epsilon lambda epsilon gamma omicron nu tau omega chi rho iota sigma tau omega kappa alpha iota omicron chi rho iota sigma tau omicron sigma epsilon kappa epsilon iota nu omicron iota sigma pi rho omicron sigma epsilon lambda epsilon gamma epsilon nu omicron tau iota pi epsilon pi lambda eta rho omega tau alpha iota omicron rho omicron sigma tau omega nu epsilon tau omega nu tau eta sigma epsilon shi omicron upsilon sigma iota alpha sigma tau omicron upsilon sigma alpha tau alpha nu alpha lambda alpha epsilon gamma iota zeta epsilon iota alpha lambda alpha delta epsilon iota nu alpha kappa alpha iota upsilon pi epsilon rho omega nu epsilon gamma omega alpha mu alpha rho tau eta sigma alpha nu tau omega nu pi alpha rho epsilon delta omicron theta eta nu epsilon iota sigma theta alpha nu alpha tau omicron nu iota nu alpha upsilon pi omicron sigma tau rho epsilon psi omega sigma iota nu epsilon iota sigma tau eta nu alpha lambda 8 the theta epsilon iota alpha nu kappa alpha iota mu eta kappa epsilon tau iota alpha mu alpha rho tau eta sigma omega sigma iota nu alpha tau eta nu epsilon nu tau omega omicron upsilon rho alpha nu omega pi nu epsilon upsilon mu alpha tau iota kappa eta nu kappa alpha iota alpha phi theta alpha rho tau omicron nu tau eta sigma delta iota kappa alpha iota omicron sigma upsilon nu eta sigma delta omicron shi alpha nu kappa lambda eta rho omicron nu omicron mu eta sigma omega sigma iota nu. Translation. And they excused themselves, saying, This age of lawlessness and unbelief is under Satan, who does not allow the truth and power of God to prevail over the unclean things of the spirits. Therefore reveal thy righteousness now. Thus they spoke to Christ, and Christ replied to them, The term of years of Satan's power has been fulfilled, but other terrible things draw near. And for those who have sinned I was delivered over to death, that they may return to the truth and sin no more, in order to inherit the spiritual and incorruptible glory of righteousness which is in heaven. This text is not found in any other manuscript, but was partially quoted by Jerome, A illis satisfacibunt dicentis, seculum est ad iniquitatis et incredulitatis substantia estque non siniper immundos spiritus verum dei apprehendi virtutem, id circa I am non crevaloristitium tuum. History. The Codex was purchased by Charles Langfrier on a trip to Egypt in November 1906. Metzger states, "It is only Greek Gospel manuscript of early date of which we know provenance, though the exact spot in Egypt where it was found is not known. There are indications that it came from a monastery in the neighborhood of the pyramids." The writing is closely related to the Codex Washingtonianus Enoch manuscript, found in Akmum in 1886. There is a subscription at the end of the Gospel of Mark, written in semi-cursive from the 5th century. "Holy Christ, be thou with thy servant Timothy and all of his." A similar note appears in minuscule 579. Hermann von Soden cited a number of similar subscriptions in other manuscripts. It is located in the Smithsonian Institution at the Freer Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., United States of America, and some of it can be viewed online. Complete images of the Codex are available from the Rights and Reproductions Office at the Freer Gallery of Art. The manuscript is dated by the INT after the 4th or 5th century.